Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May we all have a pleasant afternoon. The administration of Thessaloniki International Fair have always managed to provide to the city beautiful and important things to the city during the TIFF events. However, due to the pandemics this year, the TIFF wasn't held, and that's why we organized this Thessaloniki Helexpo Forum for several days. While we attended it, we had the opportunity to gain a lot of things. It's a particular honor for me to be asked by the TIFF administration to moderate this panel on a very interesting discussion, because this discussion has to do with the big infrastructure projects that have to be done or are in progress in northern Greece in order to develop and grow as a country. I'd like to present you the speakers of our event this afternoon. I'll start with the Minister of Infrastructure and Transport, Mr. Kώstας Καραμανλής. We would like to thank him for being with us this evening. Mr. Nikos Papas, who is the Head of Transport and Infrastructure Sector of Syriza. Mr. Giorgos Arvanitidis, on behalf of Kinal. The CEO from Fraport, Mr. Alexander Tsinel. I always have difficulty in pronouncing his name, but it's Tsinel because it's a German name. We've got with us Mr. Philippos Tsalidis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Trenose, Mr. Nicholas Tachaos, who is the President of Atikometro, and Mr. Athanasios Liagos, who is the head of the Thessaloniki Port Authority. When I met him outside, I told him that it's a high time for him and his organization to soar, although ports cannot soar. Mr. Minister, you're having the floor. While you speak, you can take off your mask. Thank you very much for being here with us. I think it's the second time for 1 week that I'm active here, and I believe that TIFF has always played an active role for public dialogue. I would like to congratulate, before starting, Mr. Papas, who took over as a head of transport and infrastructure in the sector of Syriza. I believe that it's very difficult, very important for the government and the political opposition to have a fertile ground at the level of rationality. And that's what I did when I was head of transport and infrastructure in New Democracy. That's why when I took over my term in the ministry from Mr. Spirtzis, we had a very positive climate. A smooth transition. With Mr. Arvanitidis, we have talked severally, both within the parliament and outside the parliament. What we should all realize is that the infrastructure projects have no colors. They are not blue, red, or green. They are projects that are a consensus, or a political consensus. It's a great opportunity today for our country, because through the crisis, we will be called to manage around 70 billion euros coming from NSRF and the Recovery Fund. So I think it's high time for us to agree upon the basics. I consider and believe that what we have all concluded, since we all find ourselves here in Thessaloniki, is that big road projects have been concluded. The concession agreement started in 2006, and they were completed during the Syriza government in 2017. And this shows that these infrastructure projects are designed by others. They are inspired by others. and they are completed by others. The next generation of projects comes from the railway. And since we find ourselves in Thessaloniki, we should talk about logistics, and we should realize that if we want Thessaloniki to play the role that it deserves, and the port of Thessaloniki to play the role of getaway port, if it is not linked with the railway system and contemporary highways. I find myself in the pleasant position to announce you that in December we will have the contractor for the connection of the sixth pier with the highway linking Thessaloniki, Athens and Patras. We have been talking about this project for 16 years. This project amounts to 70 million euros. And we are starting this week the tender for the construction of 3 kilometers of railway network that will link Thessaloniki to Alexandroupolis. As for railway, we're lagging behind. In the period 12-15, we had absorbed 1.2 billion euros for railways. In the last 5 years, we have used only 235 million. And this has been mentioned several times by the European Commission. I'd like to continue by saying that a great effort has been made to plan, design, and to start tendering a series of big pioneering projects amounting to 13 billion euros. I'll mention them grammatically speaking. The first one is flyover, 13 kilometers. It's the biggest road for Thessaloniki. E65 completion of this railway started many years ago. This government managed to complete the northern part and took the final okay from DG Com. The Castelli project, the Castelli airport, although it was tendered, it was delayed for 11 months and it was stuck in the Greek and European bureaucracy. But now the project has started and we will give front-loaded money to start quickly. About road safety, we have signed and we will present a project of 450 million euros. And a very important project about climate change, especially these days that Janus hurricane is visiting us. Together with ERB, we have tendered a project of 800 million. A week ago, the runway was given in operation at Thessaloniki airport. After some months before it was expected. Please remember the reactions we had to face when Fraport took over. But please visit today the Thessaloniki airport, see the situation there and compare it to what was the previous year. Of course, privatization is not the only solution. We should always have a country, a state supervising, but we need privatization in order to move the engine forward. You were very precise with the time, Mr. Minister. I'd like now to give the floor to Mr. Papas, who is the head of Transport and Infrastructure Sector of Syriza. The minister started positively, but then he said some things that you might oppose. I'd like to thank Helexpo for inviting me here. I believe that the range of discussions held today should become institutionalized and it should continue happening after the COVID pandemic. And in this way, we will have the opportunity to to have the program of the Thessaloniki International Fair even richer, and the discussions could cover a broad range of topics. Thank you, Mr. Καραμανλής, for your kind words, and I hope that you will move on well. I won't say that there are blue, red, or green projects. There are projects that serve public interest and don't serve it in relation to the cost they have and the time that that it takes to be implemented, and how much money the Greek taxpayers are called to pay for that. Our approach is an approach that urges the government to accelerate the projects, and the criticism that we make has to do with timetables. I would say that we had a schedule and planning, and I must acknowledge that Kostas, Mr. Karamali's, did something very important. He recognized and acknowledged that we have made important steps, and that important road infrastructure schemes and railway schemes were completed. I had the opportunity to use the train from Athens to Thessaloniki, and I really liked that it is fast access now. Our criticism will have to do with timetables, and this kind of criticism and questions you should expect, Kostas. Our criticism is that there were projects that were in the pipeline, and we heard your argumentation for annulling them and postponed, and we want to have timetables that are well documented and not just as working hypothesis. I'm saying that for the following reason. I read carefully the pre-election program of the New Democracy Party. It was said that we would have 40,000 new employment posts if the big infrastructure projects that were in the pipeline would continue. But now, since they stopped, these 40,000 employment posts are gone, are lost. Unfortunately, both in Kasteli Airport and in Patron Pyrgos Highway and in the north part of E65. So this is the kind of criticism that Kostas and other people who attend public discussion on big infrastructure would expect. I would even say that infrastructure and transport should get in the heart of any developmental project that has to do with the recovery fund of EU. Since we're talking about a new developmental model, a new growth model, due to the specific and structural problems of our economy, we believe that the new growth model should have at its very core the axis of transport and infrastructure. We should consider it as foundation, because nobody can get away from geography, and our country has its huge advantage of its geographical location, and if it acquires and obtains the necessary infrastructure, it can become the so desired hub that we aspire it to become. So, in the framework of civilized political dialogue, we are going to have this kind of dialogue, hoping that our positions from the political opposition will help and push forward so that projects like the so much tormented subway construction in Thessaloniki will be completed. Thank you, Mr. Papas. I will give now the floor to Mr. Arvanitidis. You are all three political personalities, and I believe that you have an obligation to the city of Thessaloniki because it is a nagging city, and you should do something about the complaints that the city of Thessaloniki has. Mr. Arvanitidis, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this city. I come from Thessaloniki myself, therefore my responsibility is even greater. And I have been part of the local administration, municipal administration in the past. Everybody knows that nothing today is similar to what was yesterday, and it won't be in the future. The world is changing. The big picture is that we're experiencing three crises at the same time: climate, hygiene crisis, and economic crisis. And the whole planet is changing, not only in Greece. The data from the pandemic in economy, in catering, in tourism indicate that we will have to experience an unprecedented recession. And of course, we have the classical tool of big interventions in order to face and tackle conditions like a high unemployment rate. We believe that there is stability in big infrastructure projects. Secondly, during the pandemic, we should realize that the inadequacy of public services was proven, both in the health sector, in education, in the green infrastructure of the cities, and in the mass transport means. I believe that at this moment in time, we believe that thanks to the additional funds that will be given, we have the obligation and responsibility to use all of it. I would suggest that 20% of the recovery fund would be used for public infrastructure, because if we have good quality public infrastructure, we could have sustainable growth, which is a buzzword. So we would like to propose 4 immediate projects. The first one is the increase of the program of public expenditure, and the increase of the expenditure from your ministry. 1.44 billion euros was used, but we believe that NSRF should be used to its last penny, and all this money would be given to the market. And I'd like now to come to Thessaloniki. We have always set high and big targets. We failed. We are a society that doesn't believe that anybody cares for it. You said that you liked the airport the way it is, and you admitted that we were talking about the expansion of the runway for 15 and 20 years. What about the seafront? What's the next step? The construction of the under the sea highway. What will happen then? What about the Thermaikos Gulf bridging? That's a big project. Balance the growth and development between the eastern part of Thessaloniki, the sewage system and the completion of it, and TIF. the Thessaloniki International Fair. What about the vertical corridors? You talked about it. Railway connections? Let me not think of the Silver Arrow. We used to fight whether it would be 4 hours and a half, or 3 hours and a half. And the time has come, and we'll see whether we could rely the railway, our railway, to be used by the port of Thessaloniki in order to link the Thessaloniki port with Constanza. That was the big goal, right? What about the electrification of the railway? Can we reach that goal? It's fine to have the scooters in the city, but what are the fundamental and basic choices of the country? No need to comment about the tragic transport infrastructure in Thessaloniki. What is the master plan for the future of Thessaloniki? We are asking for from TIF to design the master plan of the city, but it's not only TIF, it's the university and many others. Could I use some more minutes? Mr. Arvanitidis said. No, you have just 40 seconds. Shall we talk about the bus bus transportation in Thessaloniki? OASTA. The whole point is that Thessaloniki has no transports. So, Mr. Minister, you should commit yourselves not to whether you will have 500 buses running in the city. What is the best viable and sustainable choice? Let us not talk about the subway underground construction. Mr. Tahiao said that he hopes about 2023. What about the flyover? This is a public-private partnership, right? And how can all this be linked? Shall we have flyover and a little bit of this and that? What's all this possibility of viable mobility in Thessaloniki? All these are issues that should be of great concern for us here in Thessaloniki and for the government. It's a last opportunity for us if we want Thessaloniki to play the role that we would like it to play as a hub, looking at the north and being linked and connected to the south. I am not optimistic that we can achieve that. The importance of this forum, Mr. Arvanitidis, is that if we had just a political forum, we would end here. But we have got people in charge of each one of the topics that you mentioned, from Fraport, the port, and the railway, that will comment on those issues. The last piece of land that could be used here in Thessaloniki is the project of reshaping and reconstructing the venues and grounds of TIF. I believe that we should work a little bit more on that. Please let us not turn TIF and its administration just to real estate. I'd like to thank Mr. Arvanitidis, who's a member of the Parliament of Kinala. Let's move on to Mr. Alexander Chinel. He is the CEO of Fraport. Some good things have already been said about Fraport by the Minister Καραμανλής, who, when he described the changes and upgrading of Thessaloniki Airport, he said something obvious to all of us, and they managed to keep with the timetable despite the pandemic. The floor is yours.
It is the first time since many months that I'm speaking actually publicly, a very reduced public, but nevertheless, and it's a good sign that things are moving on. Now, Minister Καραμανλής said earlier that we were faced as Fraport with a lot of skepticism when we started to work on the 14 airports. And our approach and our answer to this was threefold: investment, better service, and employment. I think we have delivered on all these three so far. The investment program, especially here in Thessaloniki, is obvious. It's our biggest single investment. 90 million out of the 450 million that we are investing across the country. It will be one of the 3 last airports to be completed. We have, since mid of July, completed 11 out of the 14 airports, so they're all ready and functioning. 3 are remaining. It's Thessaloniki, Kos, and Santorini, and they will all be completed by the end of the year. So this is one of the answers, which is obvious because you can see the investment. The second answer was service. We tried from the very first day to improve the service and the service levels at the airports. It worked well in some and not so good in others, because in some airports, investment is a prerequisite for better service. But I think that now you can see and feel that things have changed dramatically across the 14 airports, and will even change more when we're ready by the end of the year. And lastly, we have committed to create employment, not only within Fraport Greece, but also at the airports, which we consider community and an integral part of the local community and the local society. We know that we are not an insulated company. We are embedded in communities. We are part of the touristic fabric and the touristic infrastructure at each and every destination we serve. And we think that by investing into not only infrastructure, but also into people, into our organization, into creating a marketplace, we create more jobs, and we help build a better local infrastructure altogether. So this was our answer to the skepticism that we have been meeting. And I think one of the key examples and one of the investments that makes me very proud is the new terminal in Thessaloniki. I've seen it growing from basically nothing into what it is today, and every time I come here, I am impressed myself, although I know how it was built and I've seen it grow. So we have added 30,000 square meters to already existing 30,000 square meters. The airport will be double the size. It will be state-of-the-art. It will have everything that you expect from a modern airport. And I hope that we can welcome you very soon to the inauguration ceremony, which will happen either end of this year or beginning of next year. I would also like to talk a bit about traffic. Obviously, the aviation industry has been one of the hardest hit industries through the pandemic. Our traffic fell close to zero during the lockdown period in April and May. Now we have recovered to about 27% of last year's traffic. We had across all our airports 30 million passengers last year. Now we are at 6.5. So it's a very slow and difficult recovery. And as we move into the winter season, you all know the news and you read the newspapers. It doesn't look very good for the remainder of the year. So if we're lucky, we will be breaking even on an operational basis at the end of this year. So I don't want to spend too much on this year. The exciting question is what will happen next year. And we have a lot of debates internally in the company of how next year will look. Obviously, it's a lot of crystal ball involved. But I think that we as a society, as humanity, we will learn to live with the threat of COVID. We will find better ways of coping with it, even if we don't find a vaccine. We have demonstrated in the aviation industry that we can fly safely, we can travel safely. We need to put the building blocks together. And I think then we can also have a great summer season next year. What gives me hope is that even despite the uncertainty and the problems we had during this summer, some of our destinations have recovered very quickly. We have had 50% and more of last year's traffic, despite the lockdowns, the quarantine, the travel restrictions, the travel warnings we had globally. And some of the markets have been completely closed. So I think if we learn to live with it, if we find better ways of dealing with the threat and the pandemic, I think Greece will have an excellent and very, very promising future 2021 and beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Tsinel. Λοιπόν, κύριε Τσαλίδη,
I'd like now to give the floor to Mr. Tsalidis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Trenos. If you'd like to ask something to the Minister, please do so, because the Minister is in a hurry and he will have to leave. Because Mr. Καραμανλής has to return to Athens, he asked us to leave earlier. But we joined our voices together, all three of us, both the Minister and Mr. Papas and Arvanitidis gave priority to railway projects, and these will be included in the recovery fund. So we do have high hopes and expectations, and I believe that the government has also got high expectations from Trenos. I'd like to thank the administration of Thessaloniki International Fair for inviting Trenos to participate in this panel, and gives it the opportunity to have a voice about what is happening now, what happened in the past, and what will happen in the future. And as I've said earlier, I'm particularly happy because both the minister and the representatives of political opposition asked the railway projects to be included within the recovery fund of the EU. Our country can truly be the terminal of the international railway connections. But on the other hand, it is important that it provides international connections. And one of these is the runway that I wanted to show it in a slide, but I couldn't. A runway that links the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Mediterranean, and through the hinterland, mainland of all these countries that are based on this corridor, we have the connection of all these sea arteries. 18% of this railway corridor is found in Greece, and it would be useful to have taken advantage of it, but it's never too late. Now, as for Trenos, you know that it is a company that was recently privatized. 1 year and a half ago, it bought out the Greek company for the maintenance of railway network. So it's the biggest verticalized railway company in the Balkans. This verticalization that was achieved in its production does not only help the company itself, but it will also contribute to the recovery and upgrading of the whole national railway system. Within the year 2019, we handled around 20 million passengers and around 1,400,000 tons of goods. We are in constant communication, and we are planning our future cargo project in cooperation with the Piraeus port and the Thessaloniki port. I believe that both these ports are important hubs for Southeastern Europe. The Thessaloniki port is very important in my view due to the strategic location it has in the Balkan. Thanks to the electrified railway network from Athens to Thessaloniki, the trip lasts 4 hours from Athens to Thessaloniki. At the beginning of 2022, this time will be reduced to 3 hours and 20 minutes, and under specific preconditions, it might reach to 3 hours journey. So we can become competitive. and we become very competitive to the airplanes as well. We're going to have 5 new trains that will provide more quality services in the network Athens-Thessaloniki. The first of these trains is arriving at the end of this year in December 2020, and we estimate that the first cargo trip will be done on the 25th of March. Additionally, we are modernizing the older trains that we hire from the Greek public sector, because these older trains must be well maintained. And might you haven't heard what I'm going to say before, that Thessaloniki is going to have by the end of this year one of the most contemporary facilities for maintenance in Europe. We are modernizing this maintenance unit, and it's going to be one of the most modern in Europe. Besides all this, as you all know, we are the main provider of railway services. Please, 30 seconds, Mr. Venieris. So we started becoming active in logistics. We have 2 big warehouses, the biggest warehouses in Southeastern Europe. They are in Thriasio and will be used by Trenose. In conclusion, I'd like to say that Trenose has been having well-targeted investments of millions of euros that will benefit the Greek economy. More than 2 billion euros will contribute to the development of our national railway system, and it will also contribute to turn our country into the most important transit hub in Southeastern Europe. Thank you, Mr. Tsalidis. And now let's move on to Mr. Tachiaos, who is the president of Attiko Metro. I believe that the subway is in its final phase, and that in the year 23, as you told us, everything will be ready and will have no further adventure. Mr. Tachiaos, the floor is yours. I won't start with what you're saying, Mr. Venieris. When the 3 politicians finished, you said that now the political discussion is over and now we can have a more technical discussion. I have always remembered in my life what a professor of mine in the Polytechnic School told me, Professor Valalas. So Professor Valalas, when I was a student at university, said that a politician is always a politician, a mechanic is always a mechanic, but in between there is a technocrat. So what I simply want to say is that here in Greece, there is usually a misunderstanding in this discussion, and we leave no room for technology. Why I'm saying that? Because these days, Attiko Metro is giving in circulation the famous line 4 in Athens that starts from Veiko up to Goudi Forest. The maturation of this project is very difficult. Why? Because all the side effects of the involvement of politics in technology can be seen in the maturation. How can politics intervene in technology? First of all, when it wants to become popular, and when a project demands 12 years to be made, and politics intervenes and says that it will be over in 8 years. Secondly, when politics wants a result. We took the decision to continue this tender. We took the decision to disengage all those things that the Council of State had decided. And so we believe that if we have no further appeals made by the new two consortia, it will contribute by having 1% increase in the GDP. If we have new court cases, the only road left for us is to annul the tender. At the end of this month, it will be obvious what is happening. But since we find ourselves here in Thessaloniki, we should talk about the underground here in Thessaloniki. The underground started in a different way as a political issue, and as it moved on, it had to encounter all the weaknesses of the political system. These political characteristics of the project were promoted and enhanced, and that's why we have this situation today. The last problem that we are facing today before us has to do with the sudden involvement of politics in the project. In 2015, when the subway project had been on its track and when decisions had been made about the Venizelos stop, the then Secretary General of the Ministry of Culture, with just one proposal and the letter of the mayor, without any scientific study, to keep the ancient finds in situ in the stop. The decision was made in the following year, but when the new administration took over in September 2019, they couldn't find any approved study that had to do with the Venizelos stop. We couldn't find any progress of studies. What was found was just a study, the characteristics of which were structurally decomposed. At the end of the year 2019, did you find the study? No, there wasn't any approved study. No, it was rejected, Mr. Papas. Please leave room for Mr. Tachiaus. In 2019, after the discussion we had at the Supreme Court, I came back to my office in Athens. It was Christmas, and I found a pamphlet of the technical company that had taken over the static study of the Venizelos stop, that was saying that we are experimenting and we're trying to find a solution. What I'm going to say is that when politics is involved in a project, then we have pathogenic problems that make the project being delayed. Right now, we're having a discussion that doesn't lead to any progress. I'd like to tell you what is a brave decision that Attiko Metro has made. When we had the appeal on the 15th of August, there was the impression that Attiko Metro was like a cowboy in order to put an end to this discussion, because we obeyed to justice. We will wait for the ruling of the court, the Supreme Court, and so that after that each one does its job. And even if we have made a mistake about the decision that we have taken about the ancient finds, I believe that it's justice to decide. And this means to those who shout and have judicial activism, they will contribute to the success of the project. This means that trade unions and archaeologists who insist that will go on strike and will not go to the work site to continue the project, they will come down there and continue the project. This means respect to justice. So we, as Adikometro, we take over this responsibility, we take over the risk, and we say that in April 2023, we'll give the project to the society. Yes, Mr. Tacheos is committing himself that I can commit myself that the project will be ready in 2023. Just a minute. There are some I don't think that anyone should intervene. We should conclude the first round, because if now Mr. Arvanitidis takes the floor, then I would like to take the floor. Please, let's keep the order of the first round. We will have plenty of time. A city like Thessaloniki, Mr. Liangos, begins and starts from the port. So I would like to listen to your views, where we are, where we're going. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel, and I'd like to thank all the participants and attendees, both physically and virtually. The Thessaloniki Port Authority is committed to its target, which is the growth and development of the port, both at local, national, and international level. All these through difficult and unfavorable conditions due to the coronavirus, because coronavirus has affected infrastructure and transportation. Our first concern is to have safety in the port, both for travelers and for people who work there. Having safety for all stakeholders is our top priority. As for our investment program, I'd like to tell you that we are within our timetable. The Thessaloniki Port Authority is obliged to carry out some obligatory investments of 180 million that will be even higher, reaching 200 million. That has to do with the modernization of its equipment and the upgrading of the passengers terminal. Its main project is the expansion of Pier 6. This is a very important project for the port itself and the transport economy, because the TEU capacity of the port will become 3 times higher. We will be able to handle ultra-large container specials of 24,000 TEU. So we will be able to receive mother vessels and not just feeders. This will give the possibility to the port to play the important role that it could have and serve the goods as it happens elsewhere. But we cannot have just port without combined networks, because then it's not a port, in my view. That's why the port should be further linked with the Egnatia Highway and the railway network. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Ministry of Infrastructure and the government for being close to us. They listen to what we say and they provide solutions in order to move fast. and to be able to keep the timetable, which is 38 months, and this will coincide with the completion of combined projects. On the 8th of September, just 10 days ago, we approved in the Board of Directors of the Port Authority the second phase for the tender procedures of Pier 6. This means that now we are moving into the phase of receiving the economic offers. There are 6 investment schemes that have taken part in the tender, and if everything goes well, in January, February 2021, we will be able to have the contractor for this big project. Of course, several barriers might come up in the meantime, but we should be dedicated to that goal in order to keep with the timeline and timetable. And since we're talking about the Thessaloniki port, it would be useful to mention that we are modernizing the port equipment. We have bought the necessary machinery amounting to 4 million euros, and we are upgrading the passengers terminal, not simply because it's one of the obligatory investments, but simply because when the market opens, which is closed right now, I'm talking about the cruise market opens up again, we will be able to have cruise ships here, because Thessaloniki is one of the few ports in Europe or all over the globe where the city is next to the port. It's a walking distance from the port. Yesterday, we were visited by the Secretary General of Ports and Ports Policy, and I presented him the issue of the connection of the port with the islands of Chios, Samos, and Limnos. On the 26th of September, we are expecting to handle a cruise ship, and it's mainly a symbolic, this is a symbolic act and so much economic act, because it marks that we're opening up in the market. But what I want to say is that if we don't have the support of the local agencies and the stakeholders who are involved in the port operations, we can only live harmoniously and help the port to grow. I am a new president in the Thessaloniki Port Authority. I took over just 2 months ago, and I'd like to thank everybody for the smooth cooperation these 2 months. Thank you, Mr. Lagos. All our internet attendees have the possibility to send their questions to the speakers by using the email press office at helexpo.gmail. You could send your questions so that we will take them into account. We have already got some questions raised. There is a question for you, Mr. Minister. But it's not just for the ministry, for all of you. How do you imagine Thessaloniki after 10 years, when and if all these infrastructure projects are completed? I imagine it as the capital of the Balkans that we all aspire to be, but we don't have the necessary infrastructures. This is what we have been talking for years now. When will it be able to play the role of the capital in Southeastern Europe? And that's where we need the support of the private sector. When the Costco investment started in the port of Piraeus, I don't want to remind you what PASOK and Syriza said at that time. Luckily, in the politics, as you know, we change views and we can recognize our mistakes. So an investment scheme has come and has made a really big investment in Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki can play an important role when we talk about combined transports. You can take off your mask while you speak. If we want to achieve that, we must bring the railway to the port. This project has already started. That's a fundamental step, and we all agree upon that. It's neither an ideological issue nor something else. It's simply a practical issue. Secondly, Thessaloniki must have modern and contemporary means of transport in the urban web. Making the bus services of Thessaloniki a national public unit was not the right thing. These things don't happen anywhere in the EU. Things like those that happen with the construction of the underground. Anytime that an organization is against something that is happening, they go to the court. And this put a huge barrier to the progress of the projects. So we should all sit down and agree upon these issues and to make important issues not being political anymore. The same happened with Fraport. You can see what was the airport like and what it's like now. I believe that all governments, Mr. Papas, have contributed to that, because big infrastructure projects are infrastructure projects that go beyond the terms both of ministers and prime ministers. And I believe that in some fundamental issues, as for example the issue where we would like Northern Greece to be in 10 years' times, is an issue that we should all agree upon it. Don't we all want to link the part of northern Greece with the Black Sea? We all agree upon it. So let's work upon it for the next 10 years, no matter what the government is in office. So let us all overcome those angelotic points, and then Thessaloniki will be a true jewel and gem for the whole of the Balkans and Southeastern Europe. Mr. Minister, you talked about the Council of State. Those that go to the Council of State, they use the law, right? As Mr. Tahiau said, we respect the rulings of the Council of State. This case will be discussed in the Council of State on the 4th of November. We stopped the works. What I'm saying is that we should agree upon 5 accesses. If we don't do that, we will still be here in 5 years, perhaps not we, some others, and talk about the same issues. Can you allow me to be the moderator of this panel? Please, it's not polite to express yourself in this way, Mr. Veneri says to the member of the audience. These days, we're going to the parliament to vote about the Prespas agreement. So Please don't mix up too many things, Mr. Venieri says. So, if we want infrastructure to develop and play the role that Greece could play, is to solve the problems that it has with its neighbors and not to feel threatened by anyone. And what I saw is that you stopped whatever we have undertaken and you start from the scratch. Now, as for the underground, 5 million euros were absorbed in the Venizelos stop. You received a study, and there is no study for 2023. And this will be our first question that we will ask you in the Parliament. We'll ask you if there is a study for 2023. Would you like us to have a dialogue now? So listen to the data so that we can all understand who start from the scratch. You had final study of level 1 at Atikometro that wasn't signed by the service. This has legal extensions that we didn't use. I'm not having a dialogue with you, sir. Mr. Loblos, you are a professor. This is not a cafe. This is TIF. You cannot interrupt. In the university amphitheaters, nobody interrupts the other one. What I'm saying, Mr. Papa, is the following. What I want is to bring all this data before the Parliament. We are all colleagues. Just a minute, the moderator says. There is a procedure. The speakers only have the floor. The audience cannot ask questions. Otherwise, it would take us 5 hours. Mr. Papas, I believe that you also believe that we should have a serious dialogue. And I would like to put things in order. I would like you to ask a question in the Parliament before all the political parties so that we can bring all the data we have to see what happened and didn't happen. What I'm going to say that for 2 years up to May 2019, you didn't have final studies of level 2. But let's not move to the past. Let's move to the future. Do we all want the metro, the underground construction to be completed in Thessaloniki? If yes, then we should agree upon the basics. We should wait for the ruling of the justice, which will soon occur. We should respect this ruling and move on, because at least we can agree upon that. There is a contrast between you two, so please let's did you complete, Mr. Papas? The floor to Mr. Arvantidis. In my presentation, I tried to go beyond this contrast. And as Mr. Minister said, it leads nowhere. And it's not just moral words and that this is how things should be, but I believe it's national need. There is no other time left. How much should it take for us to realize it after 10 years of crisis? And ahead of us, we have another huge crisis due to COVID-19. We should all realize that we should agree upon what public good is and how the state defines it. We are part of Europe and nobody can ignore that. But how can we safeguard the interest of the Greek society? These are processes that we can follow. Can we have a public-private partnership that can guarantee the benefits and the interests of the private sector? As it happened in the Moreas case. Of course, we will have partnership between the public and private sector. You will continue, Mr. Arvanitidis. I was told that if someone from the audience would like to ask a question, they can send their question on the mail that we said. And yes, Fraport does a job. This is what they came to do. They committed to their agreement, and that's what they are doing. They will have profit. Yes, of course, they should have profit, but they don't exercise national policy. And we don't exercise national policy to them. The same is true for the port. What they do is excellent job, but they don't implement it, exercise the national port policy. So on the one hand, we have is to safeguard the funds from the EU and to see what we can do with these funds, to have a plan for the day after. Thank you, Mr. Arvanitidis. I'd like now to go to Mr. Tsinel because there was a discussion to all speakers. Could you please, Mr. Tsinel, tell us how can you imagine that Thessaloniki will be in 10 years' time after the Macedonia airport infrastructure? What is your planning for the following 10 years? And having the completion of all the other infrastructure projects?
Of course, it's difficult for me to imagine the entire future of Thessaloniki. What I can say from the experience of the past 4 years, I think it must be very bright. If we learn from the difficulties, but also the successes when we talk about infrastructure delivery. And I think this was the core of this discussion, if I may try to summarize, is how can we get infrastructure delivered? What I mean by delivered is to plan it, to build it, and to put it into operation. And there's good examples and bad examples around the world. I think there is a lot of knowledge in the world and also in Greece of what works and what works well and what works not so well. So if we can overcome the difficulties of delivering infrastructure, and I believe that the Greek, let's say, society, the companies, the people are very capable of delivering. If you look at the airports, for example, Fraport Greece is a Greek company. All employees, except for 4, are Greek citizens. The company that has built our 14 airports, Intracut, is a Greek company. And we have delivered within 3.5 years, 14 airports across the country. So I think the capabilities, the knowledge, the understanding is here in this country. And I think it's about aligning political will and finding the right combination between the public and the private sector. And then this city, like many other regions in Greece, can thrive and develop. And testament to this is that we are now, not we, but DHL is building a new logistics center here in Thessaloniki at Macedonia Airport, because DHL sees the potential of Thessaloniki becoming a hub, a logistics hub for the South Balkans and for this region. So, and the port investment. Now, if we get all these things going, I think Thessaloniki has a very, very bright future.
Thank you. Κύριε Τσαλίδη, πάντα είχα...
Mr. Tsalidis, I always had a question in my mind. those of us who have traveled in Central Europe have realized that for decades now, trains have a different role to play. From your experience, do you believe that the railway network can develop all over Greece, or should we use only the existing network and upgrade it? Could the railway, in other words, become the main means of transport for all people in Greece? Should I also answer the other question about the end of the decade? Yes, that's a general question. Yes, you could answer both questions. I would prefer to talk not only about Thessaloniki, but about what the Greek railroad system will be in the following 10 years. I would like it to have a modern network that will be electrified in its greatest part, to have railway stations similar to the European ones, to be connected and linked to all the strategic ports of the country. And I fully agree with the new line of Thessaloniki, Kavala, Toxotes, Xanthi that will reach up to Romania and being connected to strategic ports of our country. For example, the port of Volos, of Patras. And why not? The train should reach Igoumenitsa, but probably because of the morphology of the ground, this would cost a lot of money. And of course, as a closed network of high speed, so that the journey from Athens to Thessaloniki will be only 1 hour and a half. We do need upgrading of the railway network, and TrainOSA will bring new trains for the suburban network. But if we want all this to happen, the person who manages the infrastructure should maintain it, upgrade it, and in some itineraries, it should set new modern railway network. Some destinations in Western Macedonia, for example, where in the past the trains went and brought people, should this be improved or not? If there is modern, if there are modern carriages and a contemporary railway network that wouldn't take 3 hours to reach to Florina, but it would take just 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, then of course. What about having trains for Halkidiki? I don't know if trains are needed for Halkidiki. Mr. Tachiaus, the minister said earlier that we must change the way that we operate in this city, having these frequent appeals to the Council of State, but either by one association or another association and so on. You said that you commit yourselves in order to complete the metro by 2023. Will you face great difficulties to that? I will say yes. I will say that yes, we can achieve that because the decision to wait for the ruling by the Council of State will create a case law that cannot be cannot be questioned any further. And so we could continue with the implementation of the project. about this famous 5 million euros that was spent on Venizelos station, on Venizelos stop. At this moment, the contractor of the project must construct the project as it is written in the initial study in 2006. So all this discussion that 5 million was spent on Venizelos station has to do only with archaeological works. Practically, this discussion that the Venizelos station started, this meant that if we wanted to build a building, then we have just the pavement before of that being made and nothing else. This is what we're talking about. Now it's the first time that we're having serious studies. As about what Mr. Papa said, about when the project will be over, we are approving a timetable for April 2023 with full agreement, having the full agreement of the contractor. These are agreements that are dictated by specific rules. You are right about the study, about the following. So far, we used to say that the project would finish in September 2021. But was there a study about how this project would operate? It's a project totally automated and electronic. The Fraport man, could he talk to you about the certification of Aegean planes? He will tell you that there are thousands of tests. But in the case of Metro Thessaloniki, with one train, if something goes wrong, a lot of people's lives will be jeopardized. So we need a period of months for testing. And there was no such study in Attiko Metro. Nobody says how this underground would operate. It was just talk. And I would like to conclude this, dear Mr. Venieris, with your question about how I imagine Thessaloniki in 10 years to come. There is a question, another question raised to you by Mr. Milopoulos, who sent it to you via email. I have to put on my spectacles due to age. Mr. Vetas said that there was a technical solution and the final solution was submitted, but you sent it back. Now, what is the study that exists and how can you define the completion? How can you define that it will be completed in April 23? I believe this is wishful thinking and not technical diagram. But I wonder, in the previous Attiko Metro administration talk to each other, because the technical study by Mr. Vetter was returned by another gentleman, he said. So Mr. Papadopoulos is his name. I don't think that Mr. Καραμανλής asked Mr. Milopoulos to do something. So, about your question, how Thessaloniki will be in 10 years' time. If you Google my name, you'll see that I have talked about this issue a lot in the last 2 years. So what I'm interested in is to see the underground reaching all corners of Thessaloniki. But what I'm mainly interested in, dear Mr. Veneris, is that each house won't try, I'm using my name, not anybody else, not to try to create a political career on the corpse or the body of underground. And now I'd like to move on to the minister. I asked the question, Mr. Milopoulos. You can draw your own conclusions. Can we give a piece of news, Mr. Minister? What will happen with the under the sea highway construction here in Thessaloniki? That's one more case that shows how irrational the Greek public sector is. Would you like to know what happened? All previous governments used to score the tennis ball ahead for some studies that didn't cost more than a few millions euros. This case, not million, studies that amounted to 120 euros or so. And now this company takes this case to the Council of State and demands millions of euros to be received as a compensation. This is what happens when we politicize infrastructure projects. If now the underground is not over by 2023, we will have to use our own resources. And if it's not over by the year 2025, we will have to give back all the amount of money to the European Union. So it's high time for us here in Greece to get serious and start discussing and not to have fights just as we had between Mr. Milopoulos and Mr. Tachiaou. As you can see, as it happened between me and Mr. Papas. Yes, we have political rivalry, but that's all. Are you thinking of making the project alive once again? No, we said we'll try to see what we will do. Shall we give the money like that, or is there another solution about the under the sea highway? We'll try to see if there are other solutions. We had the questions about the underground and political rivalries. The question, as Mr. Papas said very righteously, is that we will be judged by our timetables. So we should sit down together and agree about the revision of the law 4412 that causes great delays in all projects. It was institutionalized in 2016. And as a result, we had a lot of delays. Because it is the legal framework that set the basis for all ministers. And Mr. Papas was minister of the government and knows that there are some limitations in the legal framework. So let us agree upon 5 basic things. But we won't modify it as you did 450 times. And now, Mr. Liangos. The minister has to go. Thank you very much for being here with us. It was great pleasure for us to have you here with us. Mr. Liangos, for us, the journalist, in the port, even for secondary or not so important issues, several and different services were competent, state and not only. Have these problems and issues been settled in the port? Because you talked about tourism development and cruises. You as an organization are freer to move on, and take decisions, or you come in conflict with some other services? I wouldn't say that we come in conflict with other services and with other agencies. I would simply say that each one of us should do its job as it should, because the port has several different shares of users, which should all coexist together. So we should have clear demarcation lines of communication. We should reach this point. We're not still there. We're trying to achieve it. But there is all good intention by each one of us in order to solve these problems. But if we want to solve these problems, we should raise these problems in the table of discussion. We as administration, we should put forward these problems. We should propose solutions, listen to solutions, adopt solutions in order to reach our goal, which is to have a port that will be truly a truly modern port that will be the hub of the Balkans and Europe in the following 10 years, that will provide quality services of international standards. Otherwise, what the users of the port are being asked to, of course, it is infrastructure and price policy, but it's mainly the quality of services. We can achieve that much faster. Because let's not forget that we have Trenos Efra and we have Fraport, we have the Port Authority. These are three entities that are privatized. This means that we can talk about the developments that are ahead of us. Let's not forget that these can be combined with the privatization of the ports that are in progress, and they are all in northern Greece, Alexandroupoli, Kavalas, and Humenitsa. And when these are privatized, we're going to have an even broader market, which will be able to attract customers. But how? Only if we provide the right type of services. Undoubtedly, at this stage of 10 years, we want the port to be a green port. That's our target. The environmental issue is a number one priority for each one of us. 10 years ago, nobody talked about the environment, but in the years to come, that will be an even more intense issue. That's why I believe that all companies should focus on that and include in our agenda this as a priority. Yeah, transports have become green. Mr. Papas, you were a minister, and I'd like to ask you, what will happen the following day concerning Egnatia Highway? More tolls, Mr. Arvanitidis says. What should happen with Egnatia Highway? We have issues there. There are financial issues. a serious discussion is to start about it concerning the memoranda that our country is committed. All solutions should be discussed. All possible solutions should be discussed. So you are open to any solution. We are open to any solution that defends the public interest. Public interest means an operational highway at low cost. Mr. Arvanitidis, you said that there are too many tolls in Egnatia Highway. Yes. Our country should try to find best solutions that defend public interest. Yes, we should defend upon which project, and nobody should give an account to the Greek taxpayers. Which rules should govern all our choices? The cost and our different choices have to do with what will happen. Who will pay for our own omissions? If the choice of one government makes one project more expensive or makes it with a great delay, then we are judged about it. Yes, with the responsibility of all previous governments. The fine that we are called upon to pay is will reach the cost of the construction. What about flyover? It was studied in 2012. It was part of NSRF. The next government of Mr. Samaras annuls this project. We move on to the next period. Nobody deals with it. And now we have the innovation, a super dual solution that will be much smaller than it was initially studied and designed. So in Thessaloniki, we always set high goals. We try to mature the words, and when the moment came to start the project, then the events had already gone beyond us. I hope that this weakness that characterizes we, the citizens of Thessaloniki, set the target, and Athens tries to find the budget, but in the end, the citizens of Thessaloniki have no services. But this shouldn't continue any further, and I'm saying that for all of us, and not only for the citizens of Thessaloniki. We are a borderline case. I would like to see you all at my radio station status to talk about all these issues. I'd like to thank all of you for your presentation here. Once again, I'd like to say a great bravo to the administration of Thessaloniki International Fair that managed to organize this Helexpo Forum, although the 85th TIF was annulled. And it was very interesting for me as a citizen of this city to attend to all these different thematic units. I'd like to thank all the attendees. Thank you very much. May you have all a pleasant afternoon and evening.